He can find his own ride. That was what my wife said while my 79-year-old father stood in our kitchen holding his chemo appointment folder against his chest like it was something he should be ashamed of. The room went so quiet I could hear the old refrigerator clicking behind me. My sister Martha had not arrived yet. My truck was still trapped behind a transmission lift at the shop. My father's appointment was in less than an hour, and Linda had her car keys in her hand. All I had asked for was one ride to the cancer center. Not a favor for me, not a sacrifice that would ruin her life. One ride for an old man who had never asked her for anything. She looked at the folder, pushed it back across the kitchen table with 2 fingers, and said, "That folder is not my responsibility." Then she gave the sentence that stayed in my house like smoke after a fire. "He can find his own ride." My father lowered his eyes. He did not argue. That was the part that broke something in me. He only said, "It's all right, Danny." But it was not all right. And 48 hours later, when Linda came through that same kitchen door shaking, carrying her brother's VA paperwork in both hands, begging for the one phone call only my father could make, I remembered exactly where her keys had been when she decided he was not family. My name is Daniel Carter. I am 64 years old, retired from a diesel shop on the edge of town. Though retired is a generous word for a man who still smells like oil most afternoons, and still gets calls from young mechanics when an engine makes a sound they cannot name. I have lived most of my life in work shirts, steel-toe boots, and one brown flannel jacket that Linda always said made me look older than I was. I did not mind. That jacket had hung by the back door through 2 recessions, 3 layoffs I survived, 1 heart scare, and more family trouble than I ever cared to discuss outside my own walls. I was raised to believe that a man fixed what he could, carried what he had to, and kept private pain private. Maybe that was wisdom. Maybe that was cowardice dressed up as discipline. I did not know the difference until the morning my wife looked at my father like he was an inconvenience instead of a human being. My father, Walter Carter, had turned 79 that spring. He was not the kind of old man who made his age everyone else's problem. He still shaved every morning, even when his hands trembled. He still folded his shirts the way the Army taught him, corners squared, sleeves flat, buttons lined. He still kept his wallet in the same place, his medical cards in order, and a little black notebook in the inside pocket of his coat. When cancer came for him, he treated it like bad weather. He did not pretend it was not there, but he also refused to let it become the only thing anyone saw when they looked at him. The chemo made him tired in ways he tried to hide. It made his skin look thinner. It made cold settle into his bones, even in warm rooms. Still, if you asked him how he felt, he would say, "I'm upright," as if standing were the same as winning. That morning, he was standing in my kitchen with his chemo folder pressed under one hand. The folder was pale blue, the kind hospitals give you when your life has become too complicated for memory alone. Inside it were his appointment card, medication list, insurance forms, emergency contact numbers, and directions to the cancer center, even though we all knew the route by heart. He had written the appointment time in block letters on the front, 9:30 a.m. He had underlined it twice. That was my father. If fear was eating him alive, he would still make sure the paperwork was neat. My truck should have been available. That was the whole plan. I was going to drive him myself, sit through the treatment, bring him home, make him soup, and pretend not to notice when he slept in the recliner with his mouth slightly open from exhaustion. But the night before, one of the younger mechanics at the shop, had called me about a jammed transmission lift. I went in early to help, thinking I would be back before 8. By the time we got the lift moving, my old pickup was blocked in by 2 customer trucks and a parts delivery that had arrived out of order. I could not get it out without moving half the yard, and the kid with the keys to one of those trucks was 20 minutes away. I called Linda from the shop. She did not answer. I called the house phone, and my father picked up. His voice was calm, but I knew him too well. Calm, for Walter Carter, often meant he had already accepted being disappointed. "Dad," I said, wiping grease off my hand with a rag, "is Linda there?" "She's in the kitchen. Let me talk to her." There was a pause. Not long, but long enough. Then I heard him call her name away from the receiver. I heard cabinet doors. I heard Linda say something I could not make out. Then she came on the line with that clipped voice she used when she wanted me to know I had interrupted something important. "What is it, Daniel?" "My truck's blocked in. I need you to take Dad to the cancer center." Silence. "Linda?" "I have things planned this morning." "It's one ride." "I said I have things planned." I looked across the shopyard at my truck, boxed in like a joke the universe had played badly. "His appointment is at 9:30. "I know what time it is." "Then please take him. I'll meet you there as soon as I can get loose." She sighed. Not a tired sigh, an irritated one. The kind that turns another person's need into an accusation. "Daniel, I have a hair appointment at 10, grocery pickup after that, and I told Carol I would stop by before lunch. I cannot rearrange my whole morning because your father waited until the last minute." "He didn't wait until the last minute. We had a plan. The plan fell apart." "Your plan fell apart." I closed my eyes. Around me, the shop was waking up. Air tools, chains, men calling across concrete. Normal sounds. Honest sounds. None of them as sharp as my wife's voice. "Linda," I said, keeping mine low, "he has chemo." "I understand that." "No, I don't think you do." That was when her tone changed. Colder. Flatter. "Do not start with me." I should have pushed harder right there. I should have said what needed saying before my father had to stand in that kitchen and hear it in person. Instead, I did what I had done too many times in my marriage. I tried to manage the temperature of the room from miles away. I told her I was coming home. I told her we would figure it out. I told myself she would calm down by the time I got there. Men like me are dangerous to themselves that way. We think patience is always strength. Sometimes it is only delay. By the time I got home, Linda was in the kitchen wearing a cream sweater, black slacks, and the small gold watch she saved for days when she wanted to look put together. Her purse was on the counter. Her keys were in her hand. My father stood by the table in his gray coat and cap, chemo folder resting in front of him. He had already dressed for the appointment. That detail hurt me more than I expected. He had put effort into being ready for people who were not ready to help him. I came through the back door, still smelling like diesel and cold air. "I'm sorry, Dad. Truck's still trapped." He gave me a small nod. "Things happen." Linda did not look at him. She looked at me. "I told you I cannot do it." I set my hands on the back of a kitchen chair. "You can. You just don't want to." Her eyes sharpened. "Careful." That one word told me everything about where we stood. Not, "I'm sorry." Not, "I wish I could." Not even, "I'm overwhelmed." Just careful. as if the danger in that kitchen was my tone, not my father's appointment. I said, "He needs a ride to Chemo." Linda lifted her keys slightly, like proof of all the places she would rather be. "And I have a life, Daniel. I have appointments too." My father reached for the folder. "I can call the service." "No," I said too quickly. He looked at me, and there was no anger in his face, only embarrassment. That was the thing about sickness. It did not only attack the body, it made proud people negotiate for basic kindness. Linda saw the look between us and misunderstood it completely. "There, he said he can call the service." "He shouldn't have to." "Why? Because I'm supposed to drop everything?" "Because he is my father." She gave a short laugh without humor. "Exactly. Your father." The words landed harder than shouting would have. My father's hand stilled on the folder. I felt something hot move through my chest, but my voice stayed quiet. That was always my mistake. My anger came out looking reasonable, and reasonable anger is easy for selfish people to ignore. "He lives with us 3 days a week after treatments," I said. "You eat the soup he brings from Martha's. You let him fix the loose hinge on your pantry door. You ask him to look at your car when it makes noise." Linda's jaw tightened. "Do not make this into something ugly." "It became ugly when you made a sick man feel like a burden." She turned toward the table then, finally looking at the blue folder. She did not touch my father. She did not ask if he was nervous. She did not say his name. She put 2 fingers on the edge of that folder and pushed it back toward him as if it were a bill delivered to the wrong address. "That folder is not my responsibility." The room changed. I do not know how else to explain it. Some sentences do not end when the mouth closes. They keep moving. They go into walls, into furniture, into memory. My father looked down at the folder. His cap was held in both hands now, though I did not remember seeing him remove it. He rubbed his thumb along the brim once, twice, a small movement, almost invisible. But I had seen that same movement when my mother died, when the flag was folded, when he stood at her grave and refused to cry because my sister was already crying enough for both of them. I said, "Linda?" She looked straight at me. "He can find his own ride." There it was. No raised voice, no dramatic cruelty, just a clean refusal spoken by a woman with car keys in her hand. My father inhaled slowly. "It's all right, Danny." I hated that sentence. I hated it because he said it for me. He was not protecting Linda. He was protecting my marriage from what her words had just revealed. At 79, with cancer in his blood and poison scheduled for his veins, my father was still trying to make himself easier to carry. "No," I said. "It is not all right." Linda rolled her eyes. "I am not doing this performance." That was when I called Martha. My sister answered on the second ring. I heard office noise behind her, phones and papers and someone laughing too loudly. Martha worked reception at a dental clinic and had raised 2 boys alone after her husband left. If anyone in our family had earned the right to say she was too busy, it was Martha. "What's wrong?" she asked immediately. I looked at my father. He looked away. "Can you take Dad to Chemo?" I asked. "My truck's blocked in." A pause. "Where is Linda?" Standing 10 feet away with keys in her hand, I thought. "Martha," I said. Her voice went flat. "I'm leaving now." "No, I can try." I said, "I'm leaving now." She hung up before I could thank her. Linda heard enough to understand. "Wonderful. Now your sister gets to be the hero, and I get to be the villain." I stared at her. Nobody assigned roles. You chose yours. For the first time that morning, something like uncertainty crossed her face. It did not last. She picked up her purse and slung it over her shoulder. I am not going to stand here and be judged in my own kitchen, my father said softly. Linda, it's all right. She pointed at him then, not aggressively enough for an outsider to call it cruel, but enough for me to remember it. See? He understands. That was the moment I knew she did not understand him at all. She thought his politeness was agreement. She thought his restraint meant permission. She had mistaken dignity for weakness, and I had let that mistake live in my house too long. Martha arrived 12 minutes later. She came in through the back door, still wearing her clinic badge, hair pulled back, cheeks flushed from rushing. She saw Dad dressed for chemo. She saw me standing by the chair. She saw Linda with her purse. What happened? Martha asked. Linda said, Nothing happened. Daniel is being dramatic. Martha ignored her and looked at me. Did she say no? The kitchen held its breath. I did not answer fast enough. Martha turned to Linda. You said no? Linda threw up one hand. I had appointments. I had things scheduled. I am not his nurse. I am not his driver. I am allowed to have one morning that does not revolve around Daniel's family. Martha's face changed in a way I had seen only a few times in my life. Not rage. Worse. Disappointment with the last bit of patience removed. Daniel's family, she said. Linda looked toward me for backup, and maybe a year earlier I would have softened it. Maybe I would have said Martha was upset, Linda was stressed, Dad was fine, everyone should calm down. I had done that kind of smoothing for years. I had treated peace like a tablecloth I could pull over spoiled food. But my father was still holding his cap in both hands, and the blue folder was still on the table between us. So I said nothing. Linda's mouth tightened. I did not mean it that way. Martha picked up the chemo folder. How did you mean it? Linda did not answer. My father reached for the folder gently. Marty, we should go. Martha softened immediately for him. Yes, Dad, we should. He put his cap back on. Before he followed her out, he turned to Linda. He still had enough grace to nod at her. Have a good morning. That almost finished me. Not because it was kind, because it was disciplined. My father had been humiliated in my kitchen, and he still left like a gentleman. Martha drove him to the cancer center. I stayed behind just long enough to get my keys, my wallet, and the jacket Linda hated. She stood near the counter, arms folded, her face set in injured pride. You're really going to let them make me the bad person over one ride? She asked. I stopped at the door. No, Linda. You did that without help. Then I left. By the time I reached the shop and got my truck free, my hands were shaking so badly I dropped the keys once in the gravel. One of the young mechanics asked if I was all right. I told him yes, because that is what men like me say when the truth would take too long. I drove to the cancer center with every red light in town catching me, every slow car in front of me, every minute feeling like another small failure. When I walked into the infusion room, Dad was already in the recliner with a blanket over his legs. Martha sat beside him, flipping through a magazine she was not reading. The room smelled faintly of antiseptic, coffee, and the sweet chemical odor I had come to associate with fear. Machines clicked. Nurses moved quietly. Other families spoke in low voices, all of them performing the same Careful, Hope. Dad looked up when he saw me. Truck free? Yeah. Good. I'm sorry. He adjusted the blanket over his knees. You already said that. I'm saying it again. Martha looked at me over the magazine. Her eyes were still angry, but not at me. Not mostly. Dad patted the arm of the recliner. Sit down, Danny. I sat. For a while, none of us talked. A nurse came and checked the line in his arm. Dad thanked her by name. He remembered every nurse's name. He said people did better work when they knew you saw them. That was my father's way. He could be tired, frightened, sick, and still find room to make someone else feel respected. After the nurse left, Martha leaned toward him. Dad, you should not have had to hear that. He kept his eyes on the far wall. People say things when they feel cornered. She was not cornered, Martha said. She was inconvenienced. Dad did not argue. That silence told me he agreed more than he wanted to admit. I should have handled it sooner, I said. He turned his head toward me. Handled what? I almost laughed, but there was no humor in it. Dad. He studied my face, and for a moment I was not 64. I was 12 years old again, standing in the garage with a cracked taillight in my hand, waiting for him to decide whether I was a liar or just scared. He had always known the difference. Your marriage is your house, he said. A father should not go in swinging a hammer unless he's invited. She disrespected you. Yes. The word was simple. No denial, no excuse. Just yes. That hurt more than if he had defended her. Then he added, "But don't burn your house down while I'm sitting in treatment." Martha shook her head. Dad, that is exactly why people get away with things. Because you make yourself small so nobody else has to feel bad. He looked at her with tired affection. Marty, there has never been anything small about me. She tried not to smile, failed a little. For the first time that morning, the tightness in my chest loosened. Not because anything was fixed, but because my father had reminded us who he was without raising his voice. Cancer had thinned him. Age had slowed him. Linda had embarrassed him. But there was still a line inside Walter Carter that nobody had reached. About 20 minutes later, while the medication dripped and Martha went to get coffee, Dad's phone buzzed in the pocket of his coat. He frowned at the screen and answered, Walter Carter. His voice changed when he said his own name. It became steadier, older in a different way. Not weak old, experienced old. He listened for a few seconds. No, don't let them close that file before Tuesday. I looked over. Dad reached carefully toward his coat. I pulled the little black notebook from the inside pocket and handed it to him. He opened it with one hand, thumbed past pages filled with names, numbers, office extensions, and notes written in his tight block lettering. Ask for Mrs. Harlan in Regional Review, he said into the phone. If they tell you she moved departments, ask who took over the emergency backlog desk after the restructuring. No, not general intake. That will put you in a loop for 6 weeks. I watched him differently then. I had known, of course, that Dad helped veterans. Everybody knew that in the vague way families know things they have heard for years. He helped men with forms. He made calls. He knew people. After my mother died, he spent more time doing it, sitting at his small desk with a lamp on, reading letters from men who did not understand why the government had asked them to prove pain they had carried for decades. But hearing him there, in that infusion chair, chemo moving into his body, while he guided someone else through a system like a man reading a map by memory. I felt something shift. "No," Dad said, patient but firm. "Do not mail the original. Copy it, certified if you can, and write down the name of every person you speak to. Names matter." He listened again, his eyes closed briefly, not from weakness but concentration. "Call me after you reach them," he said. "If they push back, I'll make another call." He hung up and set the phone on his lap. "Who is that?" I asked. "Eddie Morales' grandson. VA issue? Always is, eventually." He said it without bitterness, just fact. I nodded toward the notebook. "You still keep all that?" Dad touched the edge of the pages. "Some doors stay locked unless you remember which hinge squeaks." It was the kind of sentence he would say and then pretend was nothing. But I held on to it. I did not know then that 48 hours later, Linda would be standing over that same notebook like it was a lifeline. I did not know her brother's deadline was already moving toward him. I did not know the man she had dismissed as a burden still carried names powerful enough to change the outcome of a family emergency. All I knew, sitting beside my father in that cancer center, was that my wife had looked at him and seen an obligation. And she was wrong. 48 hours later, I learned that life has a way of putting the same table back in front of the people who thought they were finished with it. It was a Thursday afternoon, just past 4, and the house had the heavy quiet that comes after a hard medical week. Dad was in the small bedroom off the hallway, resting under the quilt my mother had sewn before her hands got too stiff for needles. The chemo had taken more out of him than he wanted to admit. He had eaten half a bowl of soup, told me it was good, then fallen asleep before I could ask whether he needed another blanket. I had spent most of the day moving slowly around the house, doing ordinary things with too much care. Washing cups, folding towels, checking the mailbox. The kind of chores a man does when he is trying not to think about the sentence still living in his kitchen. He can find his own ride. It had not faded. It had only gotten quieter, like a bruise under a sleeve. Linda had been distant since that morning. Not apologetic. Distant. There is a difference. She had moved through the house with that stiff politeness people use when they think time itself should count as an apology. She made coffee without asking if I wanted any. She put away groceries with more noise than necessary. She answered questions in short, careful words. Once, I caught her looking toward the hallway where Dad was resting, but when she saw me watching, she turned away as if the wall cabinet had suddenly become interesting. I did not chase her for an apology. I had done too much chasing in that marriage already. Some things needed to be offered freely, or they meant nothing. I was at the sink, rinsing a soup pot, when the back door opened so hard it hit the rubber stopper and bounced. Linda came in holding a manila folder in both hands. Her face was pale. Her hair, usually brushed into place before she let the world see her, had come loose at the sides. She did not hang up her purse. She did not take off her coat. She stepped into the kitchen and looked at me like the floor had vanished under her feet. "Daniel," she said. I turned off the water. "What happened?" "It's Mark." Her brother's name changed the air in the room. Mark was Linda's younger brother by 8 years, though younger had always meant protected in her family. He was 56, old enough to have made his own decisions, and young enough, in Linda's mind, to still be rescued from the consequences. I did not hate Mark. That mattered. He was not cruel like Linda could be. He was careless. He was scattered. He had a way of letting deadlines become emergencies, and emergencies become other people's obligations. Their father had been a veteran, and after he died, Mark had spent years half understanding the benefits, forms, dependent claims, and survivor paperwork that passed through his hands. He would stack envelopes on counters, promise to call someone Monday, then act shocked when Friday arrived with a warning stamped in red. "What about Mark?" I asked. Linda came farther into the kitchen and dropped the folder on the table. The sound was small, but it found me. 2 days earlier, my father's pale blue Chemo folder had sat almost in that exact spot. Linda had pushed it away with 2 fingers. Now her brother's manila folder lay open, papers spilling out like a wound. V. A letterhead, a deadline notice, a photocopied service record, a form with boxes checked wrong, a handwritten note from Mark that looked panicked even from where I stood. "They're closing his review," Linda said. "Something about missing documentation and a deadline. He says if it closes today, he has to start over, and he might lose months, maybe more. I don't understand all of it." I dried my hands on a towel slowly. "Did he call the office?" "Yes, he's been calling all day. They keep transferring him. Someone told him he used the wrong form. Someone else said the file was already marked inactive. Daniel, he is losing his mind." I looked at the papers. Then I looked at Linda. She knew. I saw the exact moment she knew I had remembered. The table. The folder. The helplessness she had refused to respect when it belonged to my father. "What do you want me to do?" I asked. Her mouth opened, then closed. She looked toward the hallway. "No," I said. "I haven't even asked." "You didn't have to." Her fingers tightened around the strap of her purse. "Daniel, please." The word please should have softened me. Maybe in another house, another week, another marriage, it would have. But it arrived carrying the weight of everything she had not said for 48 hours. No apology, no regret, no, "I was wrong about your father." Just, "please," because now need had turned around and knocked on her door. "What does Mark need?" I asked. Linda swallowed. "He needs someone who knows the VA system. Someone who can get through to the right person before the office closes." I said nothing. She rushed into the silence. "I remembered your father used to help people with that kind of thing. You know, paperwork, calls, appeals. He has names, doesn't he? Contacts?" The kitchen seemed to shrink around us. "You want Walter," I said. Her eyes flickered. "I need help from my brother." "That is not what I asked." "Daniel, you want the man you dismissed to make the call now?" She flinched as if I had raised my voice. I had not. I did not need to. The sentence was heavy enough on its own. "This is different," she said. I let the towel hang from my hand. "Explain how." "Mark could lose something important." I stared at her. She heard herself too late. Her face changed, but pride moved faster than shame. "You know what I mean." "No," I said. "I really don't think I do." "Your father still got to Chemo." There it was again. The smallness of her understanding. She thought the injury was measured by whether the appointment was kept. She thought because Martha had driven him, the cruelty had somehow canceled itself out. She did not understand that humiliation can arrive even when the ride does. She did not understand that making an old man feel unwanted before treatment is not erased by logistics. "He got there because my sister left work," I said, "not because you did the right thing." Linda pressed her lips together. "Are you going to punish Mark because you're angry at me?" That is a clever way to avoid the real question. I am asking for help. No, you are asking for access. Her eyes filled then, but I did not know whether it was fear for Mark or fear that I was not moving fast enough to save her from herself. Daniel, he has until close of business. The office stops taking calls at 5. Please, we can talk about everything else later. Everything else, I repeated. You know what I mean. I know exactly what you mean. Before she could answer, the phone rang. Not my cell, the house phone. We both looked toward it like it had spoken. Linda grabbed it first. Mark, she said. Then, slow down. I can't understand you. I could hear his voice from where I stood, thin and frantic through the receiver. Linda put him on speaker without asking me. Maybe because she wanted me to hear the panic. Maybe because she thought desperation would do what guilt had not. Daniel, Mark said. Are you there? I'm here. Man, I don't know what they did. They said the review window closes today because the form wasn't corrected. But I sent what they told me to send. Or I thought I did. Now they're saying it has to go regional, but nobody will give me a direct number. I moved closer to the table despite myself. The papers were confusing, but not impossible. I had seen enough of Dad's volunteer work over the years to recognize the shape of government trouble. A wrong form, a missed code, a deadline nobody explained until it was almost too late. What exactly are you trying to keep open? I asked. Mark exhaled shakily. It's connected to Dad's service record and the dependent medical reimbursement. There was an adjustment after he died, and they said I had a claim as administrator, but now they're saying the file is deficient. If it closes, I have to refile, and the backdated part could be gone. I don't even know. Every person tells me something different. Linda looked at me with wide eyes, as if the complexity itself proved I had no right to hesitate. I asked, Do you have the file number? It's on the first page. I looked down. It was there, circled 3 times in blue ink. Mark's voice cracked. Linda said maybe your dad knows somebody. I hate asking, I really do. But I'm out of time. That was the first decent sentence anyone on Linda's side of the family had said all afternoon. I believed him when he said he hated asking. I also heard what Linda had left out when she called me from across the kitchen with her eyes. Mark was not trying to use my father to win an argument. Linda was. Before I could answer, I heard a car door outside. A moment later, Martha came through the back door without knocking. She had a grocery bag in one hand and her clinic badge still clipped to her coat. She had stopped by to bring Dad the ginger candy he liked after treatment. She took one look at Linda's face, then at the VA papers on the table. What happened now? She asked. Linda's shoulders stiffened. This is family business. Martha set the grocery bag on the counter. Funny how that word travels. Martha, I said quietly. She looked at me. Is Dad awake? No. Mark's voice came through the speaker. Martha, is that you? Yes, Mark, I'm here. Look, I know this is a mess. I'm sorry. I just need someone to tell me who to call. Martha stepped closer to the table and scanned the top page. Her face changed just enough for me to know she understood the stakes. Whatever her anger at Linda, Mark's paperwork was real. Linda saw that shift and seized on it. See? This is serious. Martha looked at her slowly. Dad's chemo was serious. Linda's face hardened. I am not doing this right now. No, you never want to do it when it costs you something. Mark went quiet on the line. Linda lowered her voice. My brother is listening. Good, Martha said. Then maybe somebody in your family will hear the whole story. Linda pointed toward the hallway. Your father has had people bending over backward for him for months. Daniel rearranges his days. You leave work. Everyone jumps the second Walter needs something. I had one morning planned, one morning, and now you're all acting like I abandoned him in the street. The words came fast, fueled by fear and resentment. But fear did not make them harmless. The hallway floor creaked. Every head turned. Dad stood in the doorway wearing his gray cardigan over his undershirt, one hand resting lightly against the frame. His face was pale from treatment, and his eyes looked tired in a way that made my chest ache. But he was upright. He had heard enough, maybe all of it. Linda froze. Martha whispered, "Dad, you should be resting." He did not look at her. He looked at the table. "What is the file number?" he asked. No one moved. Linda's mouth opened. "Walter, What is the file number?" he repeated. It was not loud. It was not angry. But the room obeyed. I picked up the first page and read the number. Dad nodded once, then walked slowly to the table. I moved to help him, but he lifted 2 fingers, stopping me before I touched his arm. That was pride, too. Not foolish pride, necessary pride. He lowered himself into the chair with care, breathing through the small pain of bending. Then he reached for his glasses. Linda found her voice. It was softer now, too soft. "Walter, Mark is in trouble. I know this is a lot to ask after." Dad looked at her then. After what? His eyes seemed to ask. Linda could not finish. He held out his hand. "Bring me the papers." She gathered them quickly, too quickly, edges slipping, pages out of order. Martha took them from her and sorted them with the efficiency of a woman who had managed doctors, children, bills, and grief without waiting for permission. She placed the stack in front of Dad. Mark's voice trembled through the speaker. "Mr. Carter, I'm sorry. I know you're not feeling good. I wouldn't ask if—" Dad interrupted gently. "Mark, hush a minute, let me read." Mark hushed. For the next 2 minutes, the only sounds in the kitchen were paper sliding under my father's fingers and the old clock above the pantry ticking toward 5. Dad read slowly, but not because he was confused. He read like a mechanic studying an engine before deciding which bolt mattered. His fingers stopped at the deadline notice, then at the office code, then at a line near the bottom where someone had marked the file deficient for failure to provide corrected supporting documentation. He looked at Mark's handwritten note. Then he looked at the VA letterhead again. "They sent you to general intake?" he asked. Mark said, "3 times. Did you ask for regional review?" "I asked for a supervisor." "That is not the same thing." "I didn't know." "I know you didn't." Dad's voice held no judgment. That was one of the reasons men had trusted him for years. He could correct you without making you feel stupid. He turned another page. "This is not closed yet." Linda inhaled sharply. "It's not?" Dad did not look at her. "It is marked for closure. That means someone can still stop the door if they put a foot in it." Martha glanced at me. We both recognized the sentence. Doors again. Hinges. Systems. My father sitting at a kitchen table like a tired old man until the right problem appeared. And then suddenly you could see the shape of the life he had lived. "Danny," Dad said, "my coat." I went to the hallway and brought it from the hook. The little black notebook was in the inside pocket, exactly where it always was. I placed it beside him. Linda stared at it as if she had never seen it before. She had seen it 100 times. On counters, beside Dad's coffee, in his shirt pocket when he sat on our porch. She had simply never cared what it meant. Dad opened the notebook. Names, numbers, notes, office changes, old extensions crossed out and replaced by new ones. 31 years of helping people navigate a maze most families only entered when they were already exhausted. He ran his finger down a page. "Mrs. Harlan may still be there," I said. "You called her Tuesday for Eddie's grandson." Dad nodded. "Different desk. Same building, I think." Linda took a step closer. "Can she fix it?" Dad looked up at her, and the tiredness in his face sharpened into something like steel. "No one fixes anything over there with magic, Linda. They correct procedure, if procedure allows it." She looked down. "Right. I didn't mean—" "I know what you meant." The words were quiet. They landed anyway. Dad picked up the house phone receiver. His fingers shook slightly as he dialed. I wanted to take the phone from him. I wanted to say he had done enough, that no one in that room had earned the strength he was spending. But Mark was breathing hard on the speaker. Martha was watching Dad with wet eyes she would deny if asked. And Linda was standing in the exact place where she had stood with her keys 2 days earlier. The world had arranged the lesson too precisely for me to interrupt it. The first call went nowhere. Dad gave the file number, waited, listened, then said, "No, ma'am. I understand what the screen says. I'm asking whether the deficiency notice has been forwarded to regional review or only marked through intake." A pause. "No, general intake cannot answer that." Another pause. "I do not need the public number. I have the public number. That is how I reached you." Linda looked at me with nervous hope. I did not return it. Dad closed his eyes briefly. "All right. Thank you for your time." He hung up. Mark said, "That's what they keep doing. They just send you around." Dad turned a page in his notebook. "First ring is usually a wall." He dialed again. This time he asked for a department by its old name. The person on the other end must have corrected him because Dad said, "Yes, I know it was renamed. After the consolidation, emergency backlog moved under regional case review. Unless they moved it again and forgot to tell the people who need it." Martha's mouth twitched. Even exhausted, Dad could make bureaucracy sound personally embarrassing. The call transferred twice. The second transfer dropped. Linda made a small, desperate sound. "Oh, God." Dad looked at her over his glasses. "Panic wastes oxygen." Martha turned away so Linda would not see her expression. Dad dialed a third number, this one from memory. He did not even look at the notebook until the call connected. "My name is Walter Carter," he said. "I'm trying to reach the emergency backlog desk connected to regional case review." "Yes, I'll hold." He waited. 30 seconds. A minute. The kitchen clock ticked. Mark whispered something to himself on the speaker. Linda clasped her hands so tightly her knuckles whitened. Dad said, "No, sir, I am not the claimant. I am assisting the claimant with permission. He is on the line and can verify. Before that, I need to know whether file number 47-19-6B is still in marked foreclosure status or has already been closed." He listened. "Then it is not closed." Another pause. "Because marked for closure and closed are not the same thing. And if you work that desk long enough to answer this phone, you know it." My father had not raised his voice, but something in it made the rest of us stand still. The man on the phone spoke for a while. Dad wrote one word on the back of an envelope. Harlan. Then he said, "I appreciate that. Please transfer me." Linda whispered, "Is that good?" Nobody answered her. The transfer clicked. A new voice came on, faint but clear enough that I could hear a woman say, "Regional Review, Harlan speaking." Dad sat a little straighter. "Evelyn Harlan?" he asked. A pause. "This is Walter Carter. I used to work volunteer case support through the County Veterans Hall. Mostly overflow appeals, widows' claims, medical reimbursement corrections." "Yes, ma'am. That Walter." The kitchen changed again. It was not relief yet. It was recognition. Not ours, hers. We could hear it in the way her voice warmed through the receiver, though we could not make out every word. She remembered him. Dad smiled faintly for the first time all afternoon. "I'm still upright." Mrs. Harlan said something. "No, I'm not calling for myself," Dad said. "I have a family case in front of me, and I need to know whether I'm reading the notice correctly before a man loses his review window." Mark made a sound like he was trying not to cry. Dad gave the file number. He gave Mark's full name. He had Mark verify permission over the speaker. Then Dad went through the paperwork with a precision that made the room feel less like a kitchen and more like a hearing. He did not beg. He did not exaggerate. He did not say Mark was a good man who deserved mercy. He stayed with facts. Date sent, form code, missing correction, prior instruction from intake, deadline stamp, closure status. Mrs. Harlan spoke for a long time. Dad listened without interrupting except to say, "Yes, ma'am," and "I have that page here." Then he said, "That is what I thought. The corrected supporting document was requested under the wrong category." Linda looked confused. Martha closed her eyes. Dad continued, "If it is treated as new support, he misses the window. If it is treated as correction to a timely submission, the review remains alive." Another pause. "No, I'm not asking you to bend a rule. I'm asking you to apply the right one." That sentence went through me like a bell. I looked at Linda. She was staring at Dad, really staring now. Maybe for the first time since he came to live part of each week under our roof. Not at the cardigan, not at the age, not at the chemo pallor. At the man, at the authority, at the history inside him that she had dismissed because it did not announce itself loudly enough for her respect. Dad wrote 3 lines on the envelope. Then he said, "He can send that before 5?" Mrs. Harlan answered, "Directly to your attention?" Another answer, "And you will mark the review window preserved pending corrected categorization." Dad nodded slowly. "Thank you, Evelyn, truly." He listened again, and his expression softened. "Yes," he said. "Mary passed 8 years ago. Thank you. She would have remembered you, too." That was when Martha looked down. Dad cleared his throat. "I'll tell him. You take care." He hung up. For 1 second, nobody moved. Then Mark spoke from the house phone, voice broken wide open. "Mr. Carter?" Dad rubbed his forehead with 2 fingers. "You listening?" "Yes, sir." "Good. Write this down. You have 26 minutes. You are going to scan the corrected document, not photograph it crooked on your kitchen counter. You are going to put your file number in the subject line, your full name, and the words, 'Corrected supporting documentation for timely submission.' You are going to send it to the direct email I'm about to give you. Then you are going to call this number and confirm receipt before 5. Do not talk too much. Do not tell your life story. Ask whether the document has been received and attached under corrected categorization. Make them say those words. Mark was crying now. There was no hiding it. Yes, sir. Dad read the email and number from the envelope. Mark repeated them back wrong the first time. Dad made him repeat them again and again, patiently, firmly, like he had all the time in the world, though the clock said otherwise, and his body said he had already spent too much of himself. When Mark finally had it right, Dad said, "Go." The line clicked off. Linda let out a breath and reached for the back of a chair as if her knees had weakened. "Walter." Dad placed the receiver down carefully. Then he gathered the VA papers into a neat stack, tapped the edges square, and slid them toward her. For one terrible moment, I thought she might say thank you, and believe that was enough. She did say it. "Thank you," she whispered. Dad looked at her, and his face held no triumph, no cruelty, no satisfaction, only exhaustion and something deeper I could not name. "You're welcome," he said. That was all. But it was not over. Mark called back 19 minutes later. I remember because I watched the minute hand crawl around the clock like it had weight. During those 19 minutes, nobody knew how to stand. Martha stayed near the counter, arms crossed, eyes fixed on Dad. Linda sat down, then stood back up, then sat again. Dad leaned back in the chair with his eyes closed. I asked if he needed water. He nodded once. I brought it. His hand trembled when he lifted the glass. Linda saw that too. Good, I thought. See it. See the cost. When the phone rang, Linda jumped. I answered and put it on speaker. Mark's voice came through breathless. "They got it. They attached it. Mrs. Harlan's office confirmed the review window is preserved. She said it's not approved yet, but it's alive. That's the word she used. Alive." Linda covered her mouth. Martha put one hand on the counter and looked toward the ceiling. Dad opened his eyes. Mark continued. "Mr. Carter, I don't know what to say. I've been calling since 8 this morning. You did it in less than an hour." Dad said, "I did not do it. The paperwork was timely. It was categorized wrong." "No, sir," Mark said. "With respect, I know the difference between a form and a person. That door opened because of you." Dad did not answer right away. Then he said, "Finish what they told you to finish. Do not waste the opening." "I won't." "And Mark?" "Yes, sir. Next time a letter comes with a deadline, read it before the deadline becomes a fire." Mark gave a wet, embarrassed laugh. "Yes, sir." The call ended. The kitchen was quiet again, but not the same quiet as 2 days before. That first quiet had been shame landing on a man who did not deserve it. This quiet was judgment circling the room, deciding where to sit. Martha was the one who spoke first. "That," she said, looking at Linda, "is what Dad has been for people his whole life. A door." Linda's eyes filled, but Martha did not soften. "You saw a burden because he needed a ride," she continued. "Mark saw a lifeline because he needed a name. Same man." Linda looked at Dad. "I was scared for my brother." Dad nodded. "I know. I wasn't thinking clearly." "No," Martha said. "You were thinking very clearly 2 days ago." "Martha," Dad said. "No, Dad. I love you, but no." Martha's voice shook now. "You don't get to make this comfortable for everyone. You were standing right there. You heard her. And today she walked in with a folder like the world was supposed to stop. Linda wiped at one eye. I said thank you. Martha looked at her like the words had insulted the room. Daniel, I thought to myself, speak. For once, I did. Thank you is what you say when someone holds a door, I said. Not when the man you humiliated spends the strength he had left after chemo saving your brother's case. Linda turned to me. What do you want me to say? The truth. She looked at Dad, then at me, then at the table. The manila folder was still there. The envelope with Dad's handwriting lay on top of it. File number, email, direct line, corrected categorization. Proof, in ink, that the man she dismissed had just done what none of them could. I was wrong, she said. The words came out small. Dad's expression did not change. Linda tried again. Walter, I was wrong. He looked at her for a long moment. About what? She seemed startled by the question. Dad waited. Linda swallowed. About the ride. Martha made a sound under her breath. Dad said, the ride was one thing. Linda's face tightened, not in anger this time, but because the floor under the apology had dropped lower than she expected. I said, he is asking you to name it. Her eyes moved to the hallway, to the chair where Dad had been resting before he heard her defend herself by shrinking him, then back to the table. I treated you like you were not family, she said. Dad held her gaze. And then, she continued, voice breaking, I asked you to help my family. There it was. Not enough to heal everything, not enough to erase the kitchen, the keys, the blue folder, my father's lowered eyes. But it was the first honest sentence she had given us. Dad nodded once, very slowly. I heard you, he said. Linda started to cry then. Quietly at first, then harder. I did not comfort her. Neither did Martha. That may sound cruel, but it was not. For once, Linda had to sit with the full shape of what she had done, without someone rushing in to fold it smaller. Dad pushed his chair back. I moved beside him, and this time he let me help. His weight was light against my arm. Too light. He stood, gathered his little black notebook, and slipped it back into his coat pocket. Dad, I said, you need to lie down. That was my plan before everybody brought the federal government into your kitchen. Martha laughed once through tears. Even Linda almost smiled, but it collapsed before it formed. Dad took one step, then stopped beside the table. He placed his hand lightly on the manila folder. Mark still has work to do, he said. Don't let him waste the chance. Linda nodded quickly. I won't. Then Dad looked at her, not unkindly, but without the softness she had always been able to borrow from him. And Linda? Yes? Cancer treatment is not an errand. She closed her eyes. He did not wait for a response. He walked back toward the hallway with my hand under his elbow and Martha following close behind. At the bedroom door, he paused and looked at me. Danny, he said quietly, don't start a war in my name. I looked back toward the kitchen, where Linda stood alone beside the folder she had needed us to care about. I won't, I said. But I knew something had started anyway. Not a war, not revenge. Something quieter and more permanent. A line had appeared in the house, and for the first time in years, I was not going to sweep a rug over it. The next morning, the house felt different in a way I could not explain without sounding foolish. Nothing had moved. The same kitchen table sat under the same light. The same clock ticked above the pantry. The same back door stuck slightly near the bottom because the frame had swollen after a week of rain. But something invisible had shifted overnight. A house can survive years of quiet disappointment if everyone agrees not to name it. The moment truth gets spoken out loud, even once, the walls stop helping you hide. Linda moved carefully through the kitchen that morning, not because she was suddenly gentle, but because she understood that every ordinary sound had meaning now. A coffee cup placed too hard on the counter sounded like resentment. A cabinet door closed too softly sounded like guilt. She had cried the night before after Dad went back to bed, but tears had not fixed anything. Tears are not repair. They are only evidence that something finally broke where the person could feel it. Dad slept poorly. I heard him shifting in the small bedroom twice during the night. Around 3 in the morning, I got up and found him sitting on the edge of the bed in the dark, his hands folded over the top of his cane. The hallway light was off, but the moon through the window gave just enough shape to his shoulders. They looked narrower than I remembered. That was one of the cruel things about illness. It took from a man in measurements you did not notice until suddenly his coat hung wrong. His chair seemed too large, and his son realized strength had been leaving the room in small installments. I asked if he needed anything. He said no. Then, after a pause, he said, "Maybe water." I brought him a glass, and he drank slowly, both hands around it. Neither of us mentioned Linda. Neither of us mentioned Mark. The whole house had been full of those names for hours, but at 3 in the morning all that mattered was that my father was tired and trying not to show me how tired. By 7, Martha came back with breakfast biscuits, ginger candy, and the kind of energy people bring when they have spent half the night angry on someone else's behalf. She kissed Dad on the top of his head when he sat at the table, which he pretended to dislike and secretly accepted. Linda was at the stove, scrambling eggs nobody had asked for. Her eyes were swollen. She had put on makeup, but grief and shame are hard to cover when they have already reached the bones of a room. "Morning," Martha said, not warmly. Linda turned. "Morning." That one word carried the whole argument from the day before, folded small and set on the counter. Dad sat in his chair with a blanket around his shoulders, the little black notebook beside his coffee. I noticed Linda looking at it again. Not the way she had looked at it yesterday, like a tool she needed. Today she looked at it like an object from a life she had never bothered to understand. Maybe that was where remorse begins. Not with being sorry for what you said, but with realizing how much you had failed to see before you said it. The house phone rang at 7:18. I remember the time because the clock had become an enemy the day before, and I had not stopped watching it. Linda flinched. Dad reached for the receiver before anyone else moved. "Walter Carter," he said. It was Mark. Dad put him on speaker after asking if it was all right. That small courtesy landed harder than it should have. Even after everything, Dad asked permission before making someone's trouble public. Mark's voice sounded rough but steadier. "Mr. Carter, I wanted to call before work. Mrs. Harlan's office emailed confirmation this morning. The review window is preserved. They still need the corrected category form by Monday, but she gave me the exact form number and told me where to send it." Dad nodded as if Mark could see him. "Good. I also wanted to say thank you properly. Yesterday I was too panicked." "You said enough." "No, sir, I didn't." Mark took a breath. "I called you because I needed something, I know that. But after I hung up, I kept thinking about how you sounded on that phone. You knew what to ask. You knew when they were brushing me off. You knew the difference between closed and almost closed. I've been treating those letters like they were just paper. They were doors, and I kept letting them shut. Dad looked down into his coffee. Mark continued. Linda told me what happened before, about your appointment. Not all of it, maybe, but enough. I'm sorry you were put in that position. Linda closed her eyes. Dad said, You did not put me there. No, sir, but I benefited from you helping anyway. The kitchen was silent. Mark's voice thickened. My father would have liked you. Dad's hand stilled around the receiver. He probably would have argued with me less than you did, Mark added, trying to laugh and failing. Dad gave a faint smile. I doubt that. Veterans are gifted arguers. Mark laughed for real then, a broken little sound, but honest. Then he said, Sir, I didn't know you were the reason this got fixed. Dad looked at the manila folders still stacked neatly near the edge of the table. It is not fixed yet, but now you have a door. Martha, standing behind Dad's chair, put one hand over her mouth. Mark said, I won't waste it. See that you don't. After they hung up, the kitchen held that sentence for a moment. Now you have a door. It was what Dad had been for people his whole life. Not a shortcut, not a magician, not a man with power he used to make others feel small. A door. He knew where systems locked, where families panicked, where one wrong word sent a person back to the beginning. He knew because he had spent 31 years listening to people who were already tired when they reached him. And Linda had looked at that same man and decided one ride was too much. Martha finally said it out loud. That's what Dad has been for people his whole life, she said. A door. Linda gripped the edge of the counter. Martha looked at her, not with the fire from yesterday, but with something colder. You saw a burden because he needed a ride. Mark saw a lifeline because he needed a name. Same man. Linda turned from the stove. I know. Do you? Dad said, Martha. No, Dad, she said, softer than before but firm. You always stop people right before they have to sit in what they did. You make it easier for them because you think that's mercy. Maybe it is sometimes, but sometimes it just teaches them they can hurt you and still leave clean. Dad looked at his daughter for a long moment. I could see the conflict in him. He wanted peace. He also knew she was right. Linda stepped away from the stove and wiped her hands on a towel, though there was nothing on them. Martha, I do know. Martha waited. Linda looked at Dad. I treated you like you were Daniel's responsibility instead of part of this family. The room did not move. She went on, voice uneven. I heard myself say it yesterday. Daniel's family. Like I had not eaten at this table with you. Like I had not asked you to fix the pantry hinge. Like I had not let you help me with my car and then turned around and acted like one ride to Chemo was too much. Dad's face remained still, but his eyes lowered. I was wrong, Linda said. Not just about the ride. About you. That was closer. I felt it, and I think everyone else did too. The apology had moved from the event to the belief underneath it. That mattered. A person can apologize for a bad morning and keep the same heart that caused it. But when they name the belief, the mask cracks. Martha did not forgive her. Not then. She only nodded once. Dad said, Eggs are burning. Linda turned quickly. The eggs were, in fact, beginning to brown at the edges. Martha made a small sound that might have been a laugh. Even I felt my mouth move toward a smile. Dad had a way of saving a room without pretending the room had not been on fire. Breakfast was quiet, but not empty. Dad ate half a biscuit and 2 bites of eggs. Martha fussed until he told her she was hovering like a news helicopter. Linda poured his coffee without asking, then stopped herself halfway through and looked at him. "Would you like more?" Dad looked at the cup, then at her. Half. She poured half. It was such a small thing that anyone outside the house would have missed it. But I did not. The day before, Linda had made decisions around him. That morning, she asked him. It did not fix what she had done. But I have spent my life around machines, and I know the difference between an engine running clean and one that has only just started to turn over. This was not repair. It was ignition. After breakfast, Martha took the dishes to the sink, even though I told her I had them. Linda started to help, then stopped when Martha reached for the same plate. For a second, their hands hovered over the ceramic, like the argument might begin again. Then Linda let go. "I'll take Dad's blanket back to his room," she said. Dad looked up. "I can carry a blanket." "I know," Linda said quickly. I'm going that way." It was awkward. Good. Some awkwardness is honest. Smoothness would have been insulting. Dad let her take it. When she came back down the hallway, I was standing near the back door with my flannel jacket in my hand. She looked at the jacket, then at me. For years, she had made small remarks about it. "That thing again. You look like you're going to crawl under a truck. Can you wear something decent for once?" I had laughed those comments off because they seemed harmless. But after a while, harmless comments build a map of what someone thinks is beneath them. "You're taking him to the follow-up?" she asked. "At 10. "I can cancel my morning," she said. I studied her face. There was fear there. Hope, too. Maybe she thought offering now would prove something. Maybe she meant it. Both could be true. "No," I said. "I'm taking him." Her mouth tightened slightly, but she nodded. "Okay." "That doesn't mean you never get another chance," I said. "It means today is not about proving you can do the thing you should have done 2 days ago." She absorbed that. It hurt her. I saw that it hurt her. I also saw that she did not argue, and that mattered more than the hurt. "I understand," she said. Martha left around 9, after hugging Dad too tightly and warning him not to pretend he was stronger than the medicine. He promised nothing. Linda disappeared into the laundry room. Dad and I were alone in the kitchen for the first time since the call. He sat with both hands around his coffee, looking older than he had when the morning began. "You spent too much of yourself yesterday," I said. He did not deny it. "Maybe." She shouldn't have asked. She asked because she was scared. That does not excuse it. "No," he said. "It explains the speed of it." I leaned against the counter. "Dad, you did not have to help her." He looked up at me then. His eyes were tired, but clear. "I did not help her," he said. "I helped a man who was about to lose what his family earned." I had no answer for that. He looked toward the hallway where Linda had gone. "Your wife hurt me, Danny. I will not pretend she didn't." Hearing him say it plainly pulled something sharp through my chest. "I know." But Mark was not the one standing in this kitchen with keys in his hand. "No." "And even if he had been," Dad said, "I have seen too many families pass pain around like an inheritance. Somebody gets humiliated, so they humiliate the next person. Somebody gets denied help, so they deny help when the power turns. That might feel like justice for an hour. It rots everything after. I looked down at my hands. They were scarred from years of work, knuckles swollen, nails never fully clean, no matter how hard I scrubbed. I had spent my life fixing engines because engines made sense. Fuel, air, compression, spark. If something failed, you found the part. People were worse. Families could run broken for years and still convince everyone the noise was normal. "Were you angry?" I asked. Dad gave a short breath. Not quite a laugh. "I'm old, not holy." That got me. He continued. "Yes, I was angry. I was embarrassed. Chemo already takes enough from a man. It should not have to take his place at the table, too." I swallowed hard. He looked at me gently, and that was almost worse. "You were embarrassed, too." I nodded. "For me?" "For myself," I said. "For not stopping it sooner." Dad leaned back. "You spoke when it mattered." "No, Martha spoke when it mattered. You helped when it mattered. I stood there managing the temperature like I always do." He did not rush to disagree. That was my father. He loved me too much to lie quickly. After a moment, he said, "Then stop managing it." The sentence was not loud, but it felt like a door opening in me. Linda came back into the kitchen then and stopped when she saw our faces. "Should I give you two a minute?" Dad said, "No. Sit down." She looked surprised, but obeyed. She sat across from him, not beside me. That was right. This was not something I could stand between. Dad folded his hands on the table. The little black notebook was beside him again. "Linda, I'm going to say this once because I do not have the energy to keep returning to it." Her eyes filled immediately, but she nodded. "When Daniel asked you to drive me, I was not asking you to love me like your own father. I was not even asking you to understand what treatment does. I needed a ride. That is all." "I know." He lifted one hand slightly. "Let me finish." She closed her mouth. "You made me feel like my need was an intrusion into your real life. I have been through enough hospitals to know when people are tired of sick men. I did not expect to feel that in my son's kitchen." Linda's tears spilled over, but she stayed quiet. Dad's voice remained steady. "Yesterday, when your brother needed help, I helped because the paperwork was wrong and the deadline was real. I did not do it to shame you. I did not do it to prove my value. A man should not have to become useful in an emergency to be treated as family." Linda covered her mouth. There it was, the heart of it. A man should not have to become useful in an emergency to be treated as family. I looked away because my own eyes had started to burn. Linda lowered her hand. "Walter, I am sorry. I am sorry for what I said. I am sorry for pushing the folder back. I am sorry I made you feel like you had to make yourself smaller in this house." Dad watched her carefully. "Do not apologize because your brother was helped." "I'm not." "Do not apologize because Daniel is angry." "I'm not." "Then why?" She breathed in, shakily. "Because I saw what I did. I saw you sitting at this table after chemo, helping Mark, and all I could think was that 2 days before, you were standing in almost the same place, and I could not be bothered to help you. I didn't just refuse a ride. I refused to see you." Dad's eyes softened, not fully, but enough. Linda continued, I do not know how to undo that. You don't, he said. She flinched. You do better today, Dad said. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Linda nodded. I will. Dad pushed his chair back slightly. Good. Now someone find my shoes before your son decides I need to be carried to the truck. I looked at him. Nobody is carrying you. Your face says otherwise. Linda gave a small, broken laugh through tears. Dad let it exist. That was his mercy, not absolution, just enough room for the next right thing. I helped him get ready for the follow-up appointment. In the hallway, while Linda gathered his updated medication list without being asked, I saw her pause with the pale blue chemo folder in her hands. Her thumb touched the edge where she had pushed it away. She held it differently now, not like a problem, like something entrusted. She brought it to Dad. Here, she said. I checked the appointment card. 10 o'clock with Dr. Patel. Blood work first. Dad took it. Thank you. Just that. Thank you. Nothing more. Outside, the morning was cold and clear. My truck sat in the driveway, finally free of the shop yard, and pointed toward the street. I helped Dad down the back steps, one hand under his elbow. He let me, though I knew he hated needing it. Linda stood in the doorway with her arms wrapped around herself. Before Dad got into the truck, she came down one step. Walter. He turned. She looked smaller in that doorway than she had 2 days before. Not weak, humbled. There is a difference. I know Daniel is taking you today, she said. But if there is another appointment, and if you are willing, I would like to drive you. Not to make a point, just because I should have before. Dad looked at her for a long time. We'll see, he said. It was not forgiveness. It was not rejection. It was a door left unlocked, but not opened for her. She seemed to understand that because she nodded and did not ask for more. I drove Dad to the clinic. For the first few miles, neither of us spoke. The road out of our neighborhood ran past the old feed store, the used tire place, the church with the crooked sign that always lost letters in the wind. Ordinary places. Places I had driven by for years while telling myself my life was solid, because the bills were paid and the grass was cut and nobody shouted too loudly. But silence is not always peace. Sometimes it is just a family holding its breath. Dad sat beside me with the chemo folder on his lap. His cap was pulled low and sunlight caught the white stubble along his jaw. You all right? He asked. I almost smiled. He was the one going to the clinic. He was the one with medicine still dragging through his veins. He was the one who had been humiliated and then asked to help. And still he asked if I was all right. I should have spoken sooner, I said. He looked out the window. Most people should. That's not an answer. It is the only one I have before coffee. You had coffee. Then before better coffee. I shook my head, but the heaviness in me eased for half a second. Then he said, You cannot change what you let pass yesterday by punishing yourself today. But you can decide what does not pass again. I kept both hands on the wheel. She crossed a line, I said. Yes. And I let the line get blurry before that. Yes. The second yes hurt. But I had asked for truth, and my father had never been a man to wrap truth in soft cloth once you invited it in. I do not know what happens now, I said. Dad nodded. You don't have to know by lunch. I know I can't keep pretending. No. I know she has to change more than one morning. Yes. And I know you will not be treated like an optional burden in my house again. He turned toward me then. His eyes were wet, though he would have blamed the sun if I mentioned it. Your house, he said quietly, should not become a courtroom either. I know. Good. Courts are drafty. That made me laugh once, unexpectedly. He smiled a little, pleased with himself. At the clinic, I helped him inside. The receptionist knew him by name. So did one nurse. In the waiting room, a man about my age leaned over when he saw Dad and said, "Mr. Carter, you helped my uncle with his claim years ago, out in Brooke County. You probably don't remember." Dad looked at him for a second. "Was your Uncle Roy Benson?" The man's face opened. "Yes, Roy Benson. Bad hip, worse temper." The man laughed. "That's him." Dad nodded. "How is he?" "Passed 3 years ago, but he got his benefits before he went. My aunt still talks about you." Dad lowered his eyes. "I'm glad he got what he earned." The man reached across the empty chair between them and shook Dad's hand. "Thank you." I watched my father accept the handshake with embarrassed grace, and I thought of Linda in our kitchen, seeing only an old man with a folder. How many people had been held up by those hands? How many doors had he opened without bringing the story home? How much worth had been sitting quietly at our table while we measured him only by what he needed? When we got home after noon, Linda was waiting. Not in a dramatic way. She was not sitting at the table with tissues and a speech. She was in the laundry room, folding Dad's blanket, the one my mother had sewn, smoothing the edges carefully before placing it over the back of his chair. She had made soup. She had also written Mark's Monday deadline on the family calendar in large letters, then added, "Confirm, corrected form sent." And under that, smaller, she had written Dad's next appointment time. I saw Dad notice. He said nothing. Linda approached him carefully. "How was the clinic?" "Still standing." She nodded. "Soup is warm if you want it." "In a bit." "Okay." She did not hover. She did not demand credit for soup or calendars or folded blankets. That was good. Performative kindness would have been another kind of selfishness. This was quieter, maybe real, maybe only the beginning of real. That evening, after Dad went to rest, and Martha called to check on him, I found Linda at the kitchen table, staring at the place where both folders had sat. The blue one, the manila one. Different emergencies, same test. She looked up when I entered. "Are you going to leave?" The question did not shock me as much as it should have. Maybe because part of her had been asking it since yesterday without words. "I don't know," I said. She nodded like she had expected that. "I don't want to," I added. "But I'm not staying in a marriage where my father has to earn basic decency by being useful." She wiped at her face. "I know." "And it is not just Dad." Her eyes lifted. "It is the way you decide whose problems count," I said. "It is the way my family becomes extra weight until your family needs something. It is the way I have made excuses because it was easier than admitting I was ashamed." She whispered, "Ashamed of me?" "Of myself," I said, "for letting it get comfortable." That hurt her more than anger would have. She looked down at her hands. I sat across from her. For years, this was the table where we paid bills, ate rushed dinners, sorted mail, stacked coupons, signed birthday cards, and avoided hard conversations. Now it had become the place where avoidance ran out of road. "I am not asking for perfection," I said. "I am asking for honesty. Dad will be respected here. Martha will not be treated like backup staff because you refuse kindness. And if you say family, it has to mean something before you need a favor." Linda cried silently. Then I said the line I had been carrying since the moment she walked in with Mark's folder. "You do not get to call someone family only when you need their name." She closed her eyes as if the words had landed exactly where they needed to. "I know," she said, "and I don't know how to make you believe I know." "Don't make me believe it," I said. "Live long enough in the truth that I stop having to wonder." We sat there for a while. No music, no television. Just the old refrigerator, the clock, and the strange quiet that comes after a line has finally been drawn. I did not forgive everything that night. I did not decide the rest of my life before bed. Stories like this do not end neatly just because one person cries and another person says the right sentence. Real change is boring after the drama. It is calendars, rides, tone of voice. Who gets noticed when they are tired? Who gets believed when they say they need help? It is whether Linda would still remember Walter's humanity a month later, when there was no crisis making it useful. The next morning, she knocked on Dad's bedroom door before entering. I heard it from the hallway. A small knock, respectful. "Walter," she said, "I'm going to the pharmacy. Do you need anything while I'm out?" There was a pause. Then Dad said, "Peppermints." "Peppermints," she repeated. "The soft kind?" "The kind that don't taste like chalk." "I know the ones." She came out and saw me standing there. She did not smile like she had won something. She just nodded and got her coat. That was the first day I believed there might be a road back. Not because she bought peppermints, because she asked before deciding, because she knocked, because she did not turn kindness into a stage. Mark finished his paperwork that Monday. Mrs. Harlan's office preserved the review, and weeks later, the corrected claim moved forward. Mark called Dad twice during that process, and each time Dad made him explain what he had done before offering help. "A door is not much good," Dad told him, "if you keep standing outside waiting for someone else to turn the knob." Mark listened. Maybe fear had finally taught him what convenience never had. Linda drove Dad to an appointment 3 weeks later. I did not ask Dad what they talked about. He did not volunteer it. When they came home, he looked tired but calm. Linda carried the folder inside, placed it on the table, and asked him whether he wanted soup before or after his nap. He said after. She said okay. Simple. Uneventful. The kind of ordinary decency that should never have become remarkable. But in our house, it had to be rebuilt, one small act at a time. As for me, I kept the flannel jacket by the back door. Linda stopped commenting on it. One evening, months later, I found Dad sitting on the porch with that little black notebook open on his knee. He was crossing out an old number and writing a new one beside it. His hands shook more than before. The cancer had not become kinder. Time had not become generous. But he was still upright. I sat beside him. "Still keeping doors open?" I asked. He smiled faintly. "Trying." I looked through the window into the kitchen. Linda was on the phone with Mark, reminding him to mail a form before Friday. Not doing it for him, reminding him. There was growth in that, too. Dad followed my gaze. "She is trying." "I know." "That does not erase it." "I know that, too." He closed the notebook. "Good. Forgiveness that erases too much becomes permission. I turned that sentence over in my mind for a long time. People talk about revenge like it has to be loud, like justice arrives with shouting, slammed doors, public humiliation, or someone getting exactly what they gave. But that was not what happened in my kitchen. My father did not repay coldness with coldness. He did something harder. He showed Linda the full measure of the man she had dismissed, then refused to become cruel just because cruelty had been offered to him first. That did not make her innocent. It made him strong, and it changed what I understood about family. Family is not proved when everyone is comfortable. It is proved when someone becomes inconvenient, when the appointment is early, when the folder is heavy, when the old man needs a ride, when the brother needs a call, when the person in front of you has nothing to offer except their need, and you have to decide whether love still counts before usefulness begins. My wife learned that lesson 48 hours too late. My father taught it anyway. And every time I see that blue Chemo folder on the kitchen table, I remember the morning she pushed it away, the afternoon she needed his notebook, and the quiet sentence that finally drew the line in our home. You do not get to call someone family only when you need their name.